journey we're going to take will help us see Israel not so much as a place in the Bible, but appreciate it as a land in the Middle East. And of course, to explore a land, you have mountains and valleys. That can be a little bit boring. So we'll follow a historical character, Yaakov ben Yosef. He's fairly well known, but perhaps not as well known as he should be, as he journeys from his home near the valley of Megiddo through a part of this land down to Jerusalem. Yaakov comes from a fairly large family. He has brothers with um, biblical names. We'll recognize some of them: Yehuda, Judah, and Shimeon, Simeon. And his father is an observant Jew, and that means that he travels down to Jerusalem 3 times a year at least. The trip from Yaakov's house is not that difficult, a few days' journey. So when the whole family goes, it's a nice long holiday altogether. And of course, being an observant Jew, his father will teach Yaakov and his brothers and sisters about Torah, about the law of Moses, about the episodes that we know from the Old Testament as he's journeying past them. Because if they walk down through the Jordan River Valley, there's this valley that goes from the Sea of Galilee in the north, which is actually a freshwater lake, Lake Kinneret, a body of fresh water, but that does have strong winds, so you can get the storms that we know happened on the Sea of Galilee. Down through the valley where you follow the Jordan River, down to the salty lake, because so much salt has built up along the way, known as the Dead Sea. And in the area where the Jordan River meets the Dead Sea, you have the city of Jericho. And then from there, you have to walk up from Jericho on the road that goes from Jericho to Jerusalem, which is the setting for the story of the Good Samaritan. It's a road that cuts through a section of Judean desert, so fairly arid and can be a little bit dangerous. Of course, when large groups were traveling, it was okay, but it could be dangerous at other times. Or the family could travel another way. They could cut through the mountains of Samaria. And as they're stopping at Jericho, if they're going the one way, or at near the ruins of Samaria, the city of Shechem, if they're taking the other route, Yaakov's father has a chance to teach Yaakov, Yehuda, Shimeon, all of the brothers and sisters about God's commandments, about the great things that God did in the past. Of course, as they're stopping along the way, they're interacting with other people, they're greeting people with typical greetings. One we know from the Bible is Shalom Lachem, and peace to you. But if you listen to that, just as when we were listening to the name Yaakov ben Yosef, it's a very Middle Eastern name. The greeting Shalom Lachem sounds a lot like Assalamu Alaikum, the Arabic peace be on you. And in fact, Hebrew and Arabic are cousins. They're related languages, and the two expressions are related to each other. The exact Hebrew equivalent of Assalamu Alaikum is Shalom Aleichem. And it's strange to notice that one of these has a very familiar sound to us. It sounds welcoming. And the other one, because unfortunately we associate it often with terrorism and terrorists, even though the greeting is peace, salam, we tend to give a negative connotation to the expression. But they're greeting people. Shalom lachem, peace to you. And Yaakov and his brothers and sisters are learning about Torah, about God's word, as they're traveling along the way. In particular, we can imagine a moment where Miriam, their mother, gets them all together to listen to one of the stories as they arrive in Shechem, because this is a very important biblical site. So once they're in Shechem, they have 2 mountains on either side of the city, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And these are the mountains, we'll remember, of the blessings and curses. When Joshua, brought the 12 tribes there, they build an altar and then read the blessings and curses. And you can just imagine either Yaakov or Yehuda as they're listening to the stories of the great things that Yehoshua said and did, exclaiming to their father, "Oh, that's why you named our older brother Yehoshua, or the short form, Yeshua." Because, of course, we're talking about James, the brother of Jesus, Yaakov, son of Joseph, ben Yosef. And so his brothers are Jesus and Judah and Simeon or Simon and Joseph. He has a brother named Yosef or Yosef. Of course, when we give them the more original pronunciation, the pronunciation you expect in the Middle East, it sounds so strange and foreign. Then we use names we're familiar with, and it sounds like it has nothing to do with the land and everything to do with the Bible. But these two things have to come together. So Yosef and his wife Miriam teach their children, Yeshua and Yaakov and Yehuda and Simeon and Joseph, about the great things that Joshua and Simeon and Judah and the other great characters from the Old Testament had done. And of course, the great moment is when they finally get down to the city of Jerusalem, the end of their journey. And they likely approach the city as many tourists do today. And this gives us a chance to appreciate an image we all have in our minds, but we don't quite realize what it is or where it is. And that's the view of the Temple Mount from the Mount of Olives. So when you're facing Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, which is a little higher up than Jerusalem, you see the Temple Mount, you see the golden dome that's there today, the Dome of the Rock, and then, of course, this is also called the area of the mosques because you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque there. So it doesn't feel exactly the way it felt when Jesus and his brothers, James, Yaakov, and the others arrive and they see the city. But on the other hand, they're in exactly the same location. They're on the Mount of Olives and they're looking at the city. And so we're doing the same thing. And as we look at the city, we can appreciate different elements of the city that sometimes as a tourist we miss out on. So if we take our eyes away from that golden dome, which was only covered in gold recently, in historic pictures it has a duller color because there wasn't this gold covering. We move our eyes a little bit to the left, and that means we're moving our eyes a little bit to the south. So to the left of the Dome of the Rock, you can see an area at the end of the Temple Mount where there's archaeological digs going on. This is the area of the Ophel. And this is where, for example, a stamp, an impression in clay that had been left by a royal signet ring was found. It was found by the archaeologist Eilat Mazar, and on it were the words, "To Hezekiah, Ahaz, King Yehuda, king of Judah," because the name Yehuda, which is the name of one of Yaakov's brothers, Judah, is the name of the tribe, which then gave its name to this land and then gave its name to the Jewish people. Jewish or Judah, Judean, these are all from the word Yehuda, Judah. And that seal was a seal impression left by the signet ring of none other than King Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, Hezekiah ben Ahaz, Melech Yehuda, king of Judah. Those are the words we can read on the clay impression that was left. It's called a bulla, the technical term. And it was found right there at the foot of the Temple Mount in the Ophel exploration. And even further south than that, so even further to the left than that, you see a great pile of rocks. It looks grayish when we're standing on the Temple Mount. And that's the area of the city of David, the area of the Gihon spring, which is where Hezekiah dug a tunnel to bring the water of the spring back into the city instead of letting it flow down into the valley, which is the Kidron Valley. Now, all of these terms, Kidron Valley, Mount of Olives, Temple Mount, um, City of David. They're all biblical terms, just like Shechem and Ebal and Garizim and Valley of Megiddo, because Nazareth, where Jesus and Yaakov and Yehuda and Simeon, where they all lived, is a city that's up on a mount that looks down on the Valley of Megiddo, which means all of the stories associated with these locations were constantly in their hearts and minds and in the teachings they received from their observant Jewish parents, Joseph and Mary, or Yosef and Miriam. So that's just a taste of what you can discover, or how just the perspective you have can change when you see Israel not just as a place in the Bible, but also as a land where real historical events took place, and you can still dig up from the dirt the tangible presence of these people to this day.